All right, well, here's another rainy day in the Pacific Northwest, and today I'd like to talk about cuttings for the backyard grower as opposed to commercial cuttings. A lot of plants are propagated from cuttings, and cuttings go back to ancient times. From archaeological record, we see evidence that people in the Levant were rooting cuttings of figs prior to the domestication of cereal grains. So we're talking about over 10,000 years ago, people were taking branches from fig trees and sticking them into the ground and rooting them near wherever they were living at the time. So this is an ancient process, and it can be a fairly simple process. Now, modern commercial nursery operations that root a lot of plants from cuttings generally use greenhouses, and inside greenhouses are misting chambers where moisture is released at very frequent intervals throughout the day to keep the cuttings from drying out. And in addition to that, the cuttings are subjected to what's called bottom heat, where the medium in which the cuttings are sitting is heated to a certain temperature, probably in the 70-degree range, to initiate roots before the tops start to leaf out. Such scenarios are kind of complicated for the homeowner, but there are ways that you can take advantage of the temperatures and such to root your own without such fancy accoutrements such as greenhouses, misting chambers, and bottom heat. So one of the ways of doing that, a traditional way of storing grapes, for example. Grapes are very commonly rooted from cuttings. This is a bundle of himrod grapes that's been cut to a 1-foot length, and these are cut in the wintertime. You know, it's in the middle of winter right now, and since these are going to be planted outdoors in a bed, they can be stored until the spring in a refrigerator with wet newspaper or any walk-in cooler type situation, kept just above freezing, sealed in a plastic bag so that they don't desiccate, they don't dry out. Or if you don't have room in your fridge to store a lot of cutting material, another way of storing these is outdoors. At least here in the Pacific Northwest, in western Washington, we can store cutting material outdoors. One way of storing something like this bundle of grapes here would actually be to store them upside down in a buried trench. And this trench could be a reasonably well-draining soil, or it could be a bed of sawdust or sand or something like that. Now, the idea by storing them upside down is that, and then they would be buried in soil or sand or sawdust to a depth of a couple of inches above the upside down base of the cuttings. The purpose being that buried farther deep, the dormant buds up here, which would normally be up like this, would be kept cooler because they're buried deeper, and the basal end is closer to the air temperature, which in the spring, as things warm up, would be subject to warmer temperature than the top part where the buds would emerge. And so this would initiate callousing in the base, which would initiate greater root development. Now, grapes are fairly easy to root from cuttings. You can just take a grape, a pruning, and stick it in the ground, and it's or in a pot, a 4-inch pot or a gallon pot, and it's likely to make roots. Generally speaking, trees are difficult to root from cuttings. Bushes are fairly easy to root from cuttings, and vines are also fairly easy to root from cuttings. Now, the exceptions to that, in the case of trees, are figs, which we've talked about already, and also willows. Willows are notoriously easy to root from cuttings. Here's a very vigorous shoot of a Sitka willow, and you could cut this into 3-foot lengths, 2 or 3 foot lengths, and stick a foot of it in the ground, and it would root wherever it was buried. It would make roots, and you could stick that right in a permanent spot in the winter or spring, and by the summer you could have a shoot that's 5 feet tall, 6 feet tall, rooted and growing like crazy, because willows root very easily. Or you can cut this up into 6-inch or 1 foot lengths and stick them into 4-inch pots or gallon pots, and they'll all pretty much root like crazy, because willows are very easy to root from cuttings. In fact, they're so easy to root from cuttings that sometimes people will take willow cuttings and soak them in water, and the water can actually be used as a root enhancer for other cuttings. So that's how easy willows are to root from cuttings. Another tree that is easy to root from cuttings is the black cottonwood, or any cottonwood are quite easy to root from cuttings. So, but those are the exceptions. Most trees do not root readily from cuttings. Most shrubs, on the other hand, will root quite readily from cuttings. Now, this is an example of a currant, and you can actually see right here was the top of the cutting piece that was used to root, and there's the bottom there, and then it I'm sorry, this whole piece was the bottom, and it made roots all along the cutting stem, and then managed to put on a couple feet of growth. And here we have a blackberry, same deal. In fact, blackberries root so easily that you don't even need a stem. You can just use a piece of a root of blackberry or raspberry, and they will root and become a whole new top. And anyone who has ever weeded out blackberries and left a piece of the root behind will know that they can resprout from a piece of root. Here we have a bundle of some elderberries that were rooted from cuttings. Now, elderberries root quite easily from cuttings. I've taken elderberries cutting material and just stuck it in a jar and came back a few weeks later, and there was a jar of water, I should say, and a few weeks later there was roots growing in the water. So that's how easily elderberries can be rooted from cuttings. Now, when you're taking something like an elderberry cutting, elderberries grow very vigorously, but they'll often have some die back on the wood. In this case here, you can see that there are new buds growing here and there and all along this stem, indicating that this is still healthy wood. But at the tip here, it's I don't see any activity, and it's probably dried out. So yeah, sure enough, that's dry wood there. So what you want is, when you cut into it, you want to make sure that there's green material there where you're cutting. And so any dried out wood is not going to root from cuttings, obviously. But the rest of this is healthy tissue. And so a piece like this, cutting right below a node, you can stick that into a 4-inch pot or into the ground, and it's going to make, or into a jar of water, and it's going to make roots. So grapes easily root from cuttings, but in this case here we've got a hemrod grape that grew about 8 feet this summer or more, and you can see the interval between the nodes is quite extensive, a foot in this case, so you might have a little better success with intervals that are closer together than a foot apart. Get a piece that's a little less vigorous, in other words, and make your cutting from that. In this case, cutting below a node and above a node here. Now you can also select your cutting points to just below the next node. That way you've got a cutting right here, you've got a dormant bud here. This part can be buried to where my fingers are, and this can be left. You don't want to cut too close to the dormant bud. You don't want to cut right next to the dormant bud. Leave a little space, at least an inch or so. Or if you're just cutting up to the next node, in this case, then you can just go like that, and you got another cutting right there. You got the cut right below the node, and you cut the bud here, and then this is just superfluous. You can trim this down to an inch or so, and trim off any side growth like that. And here's an example of this brilliant red stem here is cut from a red osier dogwood. Now, tree dogwoods don't root at all from cuttings, but the shrub dogwoods, in this case red osier dogwood, roots quite readily. And this can be stuck whole in the ground, and it'll root all the way up the stem, or you can cut it up into 1 foot lengths or whatever, and they root quite readily. Gooseberries also related to currants, and once again you can see the top of the stem and the portion that was inserted into the medium, and it made roots all the way up. I mentioned rooting hormones just briefly from the willow water that is naturally occurring, but you can buy various formulations of rooting hormones, and rooting hormones will greatly increase the advent of root development in cuttings. An alternative to commercial rooting hormones, this easy root rooting compound is actually derived from bacteria, several different species of bacteria that induce rooting. So to wind up, timing is critical, or can make a difference in some aspects with when you take rooting cuttings. Commonly, gooseberries, currants, jostaberries, and such are often rooted. The cuttings are taken in the fall, and at least here in the Pacific Northwest, they can be inserted outdoors into the ground in the fall, and there's still enough residual heat in the soil in the fall that they can initiate the beginnings of rooting, and our wet winters ensure that they don't desiccate, and they'll make more volume of roots in the spring and summer for that growing season. But for a lot of roots in general, the initiation of roots will mostly occur as the soil temperature warms, which is the big advantage of bottom heat or doing cuttings in greenhouses and such. But so if you don't have that option, then storing the cutting material over the winter and waiting until the advent of greater warmth in the soil in the spring to insert your cuttings will probably give the best results in getting roots to initiate before the top of the cutting starts to leaf out too much. If it leafs out and starts to grow vigorously, and there's no roots to support that growth, then all the stored food reserves in the stem are going to be quickly used up, and the cutting is not going to be successful. So what you want to do is initiate the opposite, root growth before a lot of leafing out, and that'll be the most successful avenue for making successful cuttings. Thank you.